Hello, I'm Sophie, and this is a recorded version of a talk that I did at the Victoria Museum and Gallery in Liverpool, talking about my experiences of being autistic. So, slightly delayed getting this recorded, as you can see by the talk dates. So, as I said, I'm Sophie, and I'm currently just finished at the time of this recording, my second year of my undergraduate degree at the University of Liverpool, studying for a bachelor's in psychology. Outside of that, I'm a research intern for Melissa, whose talk is also up on the YouTube channel and was the person who came up with the talk's ideas and I've helped set up. And I'm also just one autistic person. We're all very different and experience things very differently. And so, as much as I'll talk about my experiences today, they're not reflective of everyone who's autistic. So when I agreed to do this talk, there was many different things I could have talked about. But for me, the biggest thing was the whole process of finding out that I was autistic and what that meant for me, both pre and post diagnosis. So I will begin with talking about the reflections that I made throughout diagnosis with my mum, who was very much my person in my corner and was sort of the one helping me through the process. Going through when it was first brought up, the reflecting back for the diagnostic process, the research we did, and then actually getting it. Moving on to afterwards, post-diagnosis. So what happened after I did finally receive a formal diagnosis, accepting it, making connections with other autistic people, the actual self-acceptance part, and my future directions. So when I began my diagnostic pathway, I was 14, and it had been a really difficult few years for me. I was struggling with my mental health, depression, anxiety, dropped out of school, very, very turbulent few years. And I was already under CAMS, which definitely helped with the process. I was sort of in the system. I didn't have to get used to a new system as much. And when it was sort of first mentioned for me, autism, what happened is a lot of my difficulties I've been having for the few years began to sort of, they're being dealt with and sorted out. But then there was still a large proportion of remaining obvious difficulties and differences. Primarily the one that really stood out was just complete reluctance to interact with peers, people my own age within my school that I was in. And one of the things is I was at a point where I wasn't staying in school on my own, and one of the biggest parts of me actually getting diagnosed was the role of another mother who was speaking about her daughter who was autistic. And my mum thought, oh, Sophie does a lot of those things. So, the CAMS, we raised the idea that could autism be another thing I was dealing with. So that thrust us into the start of a diagnostic pathway. And obviously you're waiting for appointment times to come through, you're waiting for where it's going to be, what's going to happen, and also we hadn't really thought about autism before, so it did come down to a lot of research. As soon as you type in autism on the internet, there's so many different terms. So you've got Asperger's syndrome, autism, autistic spectrum, knowing what all these are, what do they look like, what do they look like in girls, because a lot of the information's on boys and a lot of the things weren't quite fitting, but then when we started looking from a girl's perspective, a lot of things made more sense and fit more. The female phenotype, as it's called. So that was a big bit of research we had to do, but then it involves sort of, you had to sort of hunt for that information more. And also when you hunt for that information, it's like, what's reliable? And where should you look? Because it was very much a case of just us going for it. And we got a few books, but then you question, is this the right book? Is this the wrong book? Is this a good source? Is it going to work? And then you've got this whole list of autistic traits. And it's which ones do I have, which ones do I not have? Because I don't have these ones, does that mean I could never be autistic, which is something that happens quite regularly? And then it's just sort of condensing all that down in relation to me, what that means, and just everything else. And it's not an easy process. And for me, my process lasted a year, which is pretty speedy in terms of how long it takes many people to get diagnosed. So one of the things with the diagnostic process, I was still under the child services, so it was my mum who had to go through and deal with most of the interview side of it. I was very fortunate to keep my same psychiatrist that I'd had previously, so I wasn't having to deal with a new person and explain all about me, my history, my background, and then interweaving things I've been through and what's just me, and then what could be signs of being autistic, things like that. So that made it easier. But because I've been very involved in already all the things regarding my mental health, I was very actively involved. I wanted to find out if I was autistic or not. I needed that answer. So together, me and mum, we did a lot of reflecting back in conjunction with the research we was doing. And the biggest one is tantrums versus meltdowns. So I still have meltdowns now. And the difference between meltdowns and tantrums is basically meltdowns are a reaction to the environment, usually to sensory overload, especially in my case. Whereas tantrums are driven by wanting something. So when the goal is reached, the tantrum stops. So a child may want the toy, kick off until they get the toy. They want that reaction from others. But when you're in a meltdown, there's nothing you can do. There's no goal. There's reacting to feeling overwhelmed or overloaded. And we don't look out for dangers or reactions of others, and it's just got to play out until it's calmed down, and this can be hours and a very exhausting experience. And for me especially, meltdowns are very much a reaction to big unexpected shock. I can't deal with it, and it's just kind of cry. My meltdowns are very much a crying, hyperventilating experience, and just drain me, and I lose the ability to focus, and I can't deal with new information, and it's just very much, it's a really difficult, and it does feel like a nuclear meltdown. It just feels like all systems just go because nothing works. I've got no danger sense. I lose communication when it's really bad, and just the ability to just bring myself back down. And that's something I've got better at as I've got older and understand what causes meltdown, why I have them, the nature of them for me, making sure there's always tissues about, because my meltdowns, as I said, are very just crying. No violence to sort of myself, or like when I just like lash out the environment. It's very much an enclosed experience for me. I tend to sort of seek small spaces, and that kind of restricted blankets tend to be a thing. If I'm at home, I will get blankets, like sort of set things up. I can kind of predict them coming now. And so that was a really big reflecting back, because I'd have tantrums. I was a child. Children have tantrums, it's the reality. But then there was times that my mum said there was times where she knew she just had to let me cry it out, and these could be like 4 or 5 hours of just me just crying. And then it would kind of resolve and I'd be tired. And that was one of the big first things that was, okay, this is a really big sign. And then another one was sensory issues. So tags and clothes get removed very quickly, and they've got to move very specifically, because if you don't remove a tag right, it still leaves a scratchy bit. It also does have the disadvantage of I have some clothes that are quite similar back and front. I have put tops on back to front because there is no indicator of a tag left of which way it goes, but it's fine. Usually it's quite similar, so I can get away with it and just realise when I get in and go, this wasn't right. And that's just something that I deal with. It's not a big encroaching issue on my life, removing tags. Some tags are alright, some scratchy tags. However, something that is a really, really difficult thing for me, and has been all my life, is thunder. I find it's a very sudden experience as Thunder. The loud bangs and the sudden flashes of lightning, it's that loud rumbling more that gets me than the flashes. The flashes sort of stall me. But as soon as there's thunder, I basically, like, if I see it forecasted, it's like a really tense experience if I've got to go out. Because it's that sort of, oh gosh, there's going to be thunder. Or if I get caught in it, or if I'm stranded, oh gosh, if I go into meltdown, because thunder can cause a meltdown for me. So much when I'm at home, it's sort of seek person, grab fluffy blankets and nice sensory things. And these are things that I wish I'd known when I was younger to help me, but it's very much that thunder's bothered me to quite an extreme extent. I've also had a very curious love of small, dark, enclosed spaces. My childhood bedroom, very early on in my life, had a wall of built-in wardrobes, and I would choose to go and read, take a torch, take a book, take my Game Boy. I'd just go and chill for hours in the cupboard. I liked the cupboard. It was small, it was dark, it was great. Didn't realise until I've spoken to more people that this wasn't a thing that everyone did. But made me happy. And I have very, very good hearing. I cannot deal with clocks. If there's a clock a few rooms over, I'll hear it. It's a loud clock. If there was a clock in the same room I am in, I can hear the clock. I cannot deal with the clock. There's been times when there's been timers, like plugs, and people have gone, there's no clocks in this room anymore. We've moved all the clocks. How can you still hear ticking? Because it didn't occur to us that timers on plugs tick too. But I can hear that, and that can be quite intense to deal with. And it's just sort of, again, reflecting back and realizing that those were signs of the sensory things I deal with. Social was also another thing that came up. Obviously, social difficulties are something that people do associate with autism. And for me, that really became apparent was the end of primary school. I basically dropped every single friendship I'd built up to that point. I couldn't handle where it was going. It was this transition up to high school, and the dynamics of friendships changed and I couldn't keep up. And I didn't really have any sort of proper sort of a real friend for a very, very long time. That didn't really kind of happen for me until after I was diagnosed. But one of the things that was always really apparent is since I was really young was I was always better with adults. I found adults easy to deal with, compared to people my own age, older or younger people, fine. But put me in the same group, it just didn't work. And another thing strongly associated with autism is repetition. I reread books. I have reread The Hobbit countless times. But even when I was younger, I'd always reread books. I'd get the same book out from like the selection at school. There was this really great one about mermaids. Oh, I read it so many times. It was great. I like mermaids. It was a nice book. And again, like I'd rewatch things. So I had like my VHSs of my Disney films. Just I can watch things back to back. And the games that I play would be repetitive. And there was also this dislike of change. Didn't like my routine being disrupted. Still don't really like my routine being disrupted. And there's also, over the years looking back, been very many intense, what would have been hobbies, or we just sort of called obsessions, because I got quite passionately into things, with special interests. So the obsessive interest was something that was definitely quite clear when we really thought about the intensity of it. Things like Pokemon, being able to name like all 151 of the originals. I don't think I can still do it. I probably could give it a good go. But when I was very actively involved, I really could. Just the sort of intense, overwhelming, could just sink like hours and hours into the same activity and just didn't. It was like beyond just a hobby. And then sort of very much my internal reflections is I remember when I was 9, I knew I was different to everyone else in my class. I knew I wasn't like other people. Didn't know why, didn't know what it meant. I just knew I was different. There was no explanation, there was nothing. And I mean, I didn't think about it, I was different and just kind of had that realization. And there's not much you can really do about that at 9 other than just kind of go forward. And yeah, and that's something that stayed with me for a very, very long time. And I think when it came to those internalizations of realizations, it was I knew I was different. And I think that was very difficult to deal with at the time. But again, you plod on, you're 9, there's not much going on. So, a very good example of repetitive games. Everyone says I'm going to be a teacher, mainly because of this. I used to play school when I was younger. I had a whiteboard, I had a little school set, I had a little register. I used to line up my teddies, always in the same order. Because that's just where they sat. That was their seats. It's like a seating plan. And I had these little books that I made. So you know how to make little folding books. I had like the little pencils. You had the pencil. You had the book. It was great. But my mum said because she'd check in, make sure that was all right. By being a bit suspiciously quiet. And she said every time she looked in on me, I was playing the same, like teaching the same lesson, which pretty dull in terms of school. But I mean, why wouldn't I teach the same lesson? I still don't really see a big issue. I was happy. But considering I was at school and was having different lessons, that repetitiveness sort of didn't reflect the real experience. I also can very distinctly remember me being given a musical birthday card. So my grandma thought, okay, this card had my name on it. And one of the things I was really obsessed with when I was younger was things with my names on it. And so she got this card and it had like Happy Birthday Sophie, had a cat on the front. And it looked like a person. I love cats. So, perfect. However, when I opened it, it began to sing Happy Birthday and I went straight into meltdown. I can just remember it hitting me. And that might be sort of my earliest kind of memory of a meltdown. So the card had to be, luckily you can disconnect the mechanisms. I mean, my grandma felt awful because it's not really what the reaction you want from a birthday card is. It's someone just bursting in tears and can't be calmed down for a while. But so yeah, that's very much another reflection of that sudden loud noise. Like, no, just doesn't work. And I've actually already covered socializing at the end of primary school. So, not going to drag on my diagnostic process. So I'd had obviously previous appointments, so we drew on things that I'd said in that, experiences, things to do with that came up. My mother had to go through the lovely, very long diagnostic interview of looking back on my life, but we've been doing that, so it was just listing those things that we'd found. And then I had to go through this observation. It wasn't fun, let me tell you, because it's really difficult, because by that point I was nearly 15. So I was sort of 15-ish, basically, sort of like about to turn it when I got diagnosed for the observation. And so luckily psychiatrist I'd had before, sort of knew her. Strange building. I didn't like this building. And everyone else we sort of knew had been into this building, loved this place. Me, step through the door, don't like it. So already not off to a good start. And then there's this woman I've never met in my life. And she's there in the corner. And I knew, because I'd at that point kind of been doing a bit of psychology. So I sort of knew the process of observations and why there had to be another person. But it's still not very fun, especially when I was sort of a teenager and it's definitely a process that's not designed for teenagers. It's quite a patronizing experience. Some of the tasks given, they feel very young, and it's just, I wish there was something that sort of bridged the gap a bit. But again, it's what they do. So I went to the observation, went through all that lovely, delightful activities. Struggled a bit more with some of them than I thought I would. Might be a sign. But as much as I'd been really involved in all of my meetings and things, we got the letter through for the reveal meeting. And I can remember looking at my mum and saying, I I was so deathly afraid of all the research we'd done, all the reflecting back, all the whole process, everything we'd been through, everyone we'd spoken to, all the accounts and things I was looking at. Autism made sense. So much it explained everything, and it was beginning to reveal that part of me, that thing that 9-year-old me knew recognized in myself compared to others, and it finally possibly had a name. And I was so absolutely terrified that they wouldn't see it, that it'd be turned around and go, no, she's not autistic, because at this point it made so much sense. And so I was afraid to go to that meeting and sent my mother off on her own to go sit in a nice room full of professionals and get told and run through the nice document you get. And then she came home and said, so formally I'm diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, but for many reasons I choose to use the terms that I'm autistic. But yeah, there I was, diagnosed. So of course, that was just one part of my journey. Sort of afterwards, you basically get some nice leaflets. That's what we got, some nice leaflets. Don't know where the leaflets are, don't know if we still have them. I assume we might do somewhere. And then it's sort of a what now? Because at that point, I'm 15, I had 1 year left of sort of GCSEs. I then was like post-16 education. So there was, many transitions coming up in my life. Again, scary enough for anyone. Adding dislike of change and this really sort of difficult few years, and now this new concept to deal with. There was a lot of things that were still going on, and very much getting diagnosed is just the very sort of first step in that journey. So the one thing that sort of was most commonly that I came across, and a lot of what I'd come across in terms of autism before it was even mentioned related to me, is stigma. Really, really negative perceptions. And also things that didn't apply to me. So there was just no reputation, there was just gender imbalances, it was very non-focused on women, and it's not fun. And especially with a lot of things I'd come across is autism being used as an insult, especially as an online gamer, and you see it quite a lot online, which is really sad. So to now sort of be that person, it's like, yay. And of course, for me, it answered so many questions. It sort of informed the grown-up version of that 9-year-old who knew they were different, what that difference is, and it felt like it completed me in many ways. But then it's also having to work out the reality of this very highly stigmatized diagnosis being attached to me, and that raises many questions, especially moving forward. And it's also just, there's not really anything to really relate to either as well. There's just not very much representation, and what is there is rough. It's pretty poor. So it started this lovely path of learning to accept myself. And at first I thought that I'd really sort of accepted the being autistic thing. But looking back now, I sort of very much didn't until I was 19. So it took me a good 4, almost 5 years after being diagnosed to truly accept and embrace being autistic and just see it in the light I see it now. And I think as well, generally, it's that sort of general teenage experience of learning where you fit and who you are is a difficult thing for anyone to do, especially in society today and how it is. The idea of being different is not welcome. And I'd already had kind of early teenage years of being experienced through depression and things, so it was then trying to come out and do all that growing pretty quickly. And as much as it was this really massive relief is getting diagnosed, it also doesn't change the fact that I still had this revelation that I had to adjust to and fit it around my life and this upcoming transition of moving to college, because at that point, moving forward and then knowing that I was autistic, that was kind of the direction where I was going. And it also didn't stop the reflections, especially now we knew more and I knew more where to look and things. And even now, there's things that come up and I go, yep, I do that. So, where I did very much make my revelation was here at University of Liverpool. And so we got involved with some volunteering. I volunteered at a parents group, at Autism Together, and just surrounding myself with autism and just sort of speaking to people about my experiences, things that happened to me. That became sort of one of the things I sort of started with. So it wasn't something I ignored. I was very actively involved in autism and related things. And again, starting university had this big impact because I'd gone through 3 years of college, sort of had kind of semi-accepted being autistic, but it was never true embracing it. But when I got to university, there was an autistic spectrum condition society. And that's where I met many of the people I know today. And that was just the thing that very much helped because I had people I related to very strongly, all at university in some way, doing whatever course, and people who'd knew they were autistic, diagnosed or not. And it was very much a case of listening to these people and sort of being around them. And I sort of was beginning to see, so just talking about my own sort of things I felt, I began to sort of really see the positives, and definitely making friends with other autistic people is a massive thing because the connections I have with autistic friends are deeper than my friends that aren't autistic. It doesn't mean I value the friendship any less, it's just it is. Do you get it? And so it very much clicked with me and I embraced all of it. And I wouldn't change it for the world now. Whereas once I would have done. And then it's moved on to me getting involved in autism awareness and acceptance, whether it's online doing talks like this and continuing some volunteering that I've been doing. So the continuing reflections. Now there's many discoveries you make definitely speaking to autistic people, and the biggest one is that fluorescent light flickers for us. It's always flickered for me. I just assumed it flickered for everyone. As it turns out, this is not a widespread thing. But they do flicker, and I love informing other autistic people, and they have the same revelation that I did, that, oh, they flicker for just us. But they do, and that's why fluorescent lighting is set. And some shops are like really intense with fluorescent lighting, I tend to avoid. And that moves quite nicely into the sensory overload awareness. So that's a massive thing I've had to develop, is knowing what I find intense, what can put me to sensory overload, and then possibly a meltdown. So it's obviously knowing that's what Thunder does. Thunder puts me into sensory overload. The Lush store, that puts me into sensory overload very, very quickly. I don't walk directly past Lush, ever. And socks. So I cannot bear to have socks on, just socks. I like to be in bare feet. I can handle socks with shoes, but just socks, no. Socks have to come off. Even when I'd go to, say, my grandma's house for like half an hour, I'd stop in for a cup of tea after sort of college, or just go round. Socks be off half an hour. No matter how long I'm staying, if I'm staying 5 minutes, socks be off, because I just can't. And even now, I'll be in the bitter cold of winter, and like everyone else has got the fluffy socks on, I won't wear socks. I'd rather have freezing feet than have socks. Don't like slippers either. In regards to social, these are very much sort of things that I've looked at more recently, as there's been a little bit of things I've read about, and so I've always primarily had male friends. Even now, my friendships, I do have more male friends. And I was put it down to had an older brother, so maybe it was just, I was around a male presence because we're not too far apart in age that we didn't like interact and play together. And then I'm into gaming and sort of more, obviously, which is a male-dominated thing, really. And so it just sort of became quite natural that I'd gravitate towards people with the same interest. But I've seen a few accounts where this has been the case in other autistic people, and then it's like, oh, is this That's another thing. And I also very much prefer to communicate online. So one of the things I really struggle with is facial expressions. If I've just met someone and I'll see the face move, but it doesn't mean anything. It's something that I can learn if I'm really close and spend a lot of time with someone. I can sort of learn. So that my close friends, my family, I know what their facial expressions mean. It becomes very much an individual thing, and I'm lucky because I'm surrounded by some quite expressive people. So it makes my life easier. It's when I've got people around me with very subtle facial movements, and it's kind of, that's just a nightmare to decipher. But if someone's very expressive, it's easier and comes quicker. And so for me, online communication is great because it just completely takes out me having to deal with that side of communication. And again, I reflect back and think, is this because, like, that's the thing. I don't like phone calls, do not like phone calls. I'll speak to my friends online. If I have to make a phone call, no, it stresses me out. And again, more reflections of what was special interest, and then also more examples of repetition in my life. There's always more examples that pop up, and things I very much can cycle through special interests. I even can now. Some of them long-term things like Pokemon, things I can pick up and put down. So I've always had a very strong interest in fantasy, and that sort of comes in different ways. So I love dragons, or I'll go sort of down the mythology and folklore route. And it's just the cycles and waves of that. And then to self-acceptance. So those good role models I had of autism, the ones I sort of sought out, and the ones I met at uni, really helped. People sharing their story for me was something that really helped. I read books. Not as much. Something that I've more recently started doing is sort of being more active on Twitter and seeing a lot of the very fantastic people that are on Twitter and the work they're doing for advocating for autistic people, and them, including themselves. And just understanding what it really means to be autistic. So moving away from the actual stereotypes and what people believe it to be to what it actually is, and what it means for me. And embracing the positives, which I found many of, which I'll talk a bit more about in the next slide. And just taking all that stigma that I first encountered and just completely ignoring it. Because it's something that I can be part of fighting against, the advocacy, the awareness, and that's the way to tackle it. I don't internalize every time I see something online. I'll pull people up on it if I have that ability to, but it's just mainly ignoring it. And then just finding a place I fit. So I've been very fortunate that university has very much been a place that I have adored and just absolutely flourished. And I love it. It's great because I get to study one of my deep rooted passions in life of psychology, and then channel that into autism, which has become a very deep rooted passion. And just growing up and growing into myself, it's a very different experience being now in my early 20s compared to being 15 and just confused. So the positives for me, hyper focus. So reading is very much a passion of mine, an obsession really, and I can hyper focus. I'll read for 8 hours. That's great, and it's really great when you've got to study. Give me a textbook, nice good psychology textbook. That's me gone for a few hours. you won't hear from me, and that's a really great part because it's really useful to be able to just study, especially as we do quite a lot of reading in psychology. And it's just to get so deeply focused and having those intense interests are just great. I think finding such joy and passion in things is a wonderful experience. And I know people who don't really have any hobbies, and I have hobbies and then I have intense interest. It's a different level for me. And it's a wonderful part of my day. It's that sort of coming home and it's like, oh, make some me time, a bit of reading, it's great. And then moving forward and using my own experiences to help others, raising the awareness and the acceptance, which is a huge part of my life, and I love doing it. And it's just letting myself be myself without masking, which is sort of disguising autistic traits, to sort of appear neurotypical, people who aren't autistic or have another neurotype. And it's, instead of trying to mimic and be someone else's idea of what I should be, just for the sake of other people and their inability to possibly deal with someone who's different, it's just being myself and not being afraid of that. And as much as I've gone on about the negatives of sensory, the reactions to thunder, but there's also some amazing sensory benefits. So I get really great comfort from things that I love. I can be very soft, fluffy textures, just kind of like nice wool scarves. I have many nice wool scarves now. I have a nice lamb's wool blanket on my bed, some fluffy blankets. It's great. And just getting the comfort of feeling bundled up in blankets and things like soft things. And I recently kind of got into essential oils, and I found that different scents have produced this amazing, very calming effect. And discovering my love of glowy lights has made a massive difference. So it's then comes into helping me calm down and unwind if it's been a really difficult day. And just the comfort from repetition and not wondering if it's weird. If I want to watch How to Train Your Dragon again, back to back, just doing it. It's not anyone's business, really, if I want to repeatedly watch the same thing or repeatedly read the same book. Just, if it brings me comfort. So it might be weird to some people, but it's comforting for me, and that's what's more important, is what it brings to me, not the opinions of other people. And again, going back to the joy of special interest. So what we've realised has been a special interest for a long-standing one that we weren't sure where it actually came from for a few years, for many years of my life, until last year my mum pointed out that I had encountered a Highland cow when I was about 3. And it was always a really confusing thing why I loved Highland cows, because I'd never, apart from cats, I wasn't majorly into animals, but I adore Highland cows. They're amazing. I love them. And last year I went on holiday up to Inverness, to the Highlands, where Highland cows come from. And I don't think I'll ever have a more joyous experience than getting to see a Highland cow. I met many Highland cows. They were lovely. They were brilliant. And yeah, I don't think I've ran so fast towards a field in my life of just lovely, fluffy Highland cows just sitting there in the sun. It was great. And, some people might think having intense interest can be problematic, but I got a lot more out of my holiday because I love Highland cows so much. And future directions for me. My career goals are centered around autism. I'd like to go into autism research or just work in autism in some capacity, more raising awareness and acceptance. And just always trying to be the type of person I look to for when I was being diagnosed for others. It's taken me a very long time to be able to verbalize a lot of my experiences and sort of find my sort of coping strategies and how I deal with certain things. And just helping people however I can, and trying to be the books I read, the people I heard about and encountered, just trying to be that for someone else if I can. And to just carry on being myself, really. I'm not trying to change or suppress being autistic. I'm just going to be me. And I've come to a very wonderful point in my life where I'm quite happy with myself. And I think it's a wonderful place to be in. Especially when it would be really easy to get trapped in trying to suppress being autistic and fit in. But I'm happy being mad about Highland cows and just being autistic. So that is the end of my talk. But at the time of the talk, as obviously this is a recorded version, I will confess I forgot to press record on the day, hence why it's being recorded. And I got a few questions. And so one of them was about meltdowns and how they looked in me, which I covered more this time. It's a sort of crying experience, but meltdowns themselves are a very unique experience. And also how to come back from them. So for me, as much as I can't really communicate or really sort of like bring in new information, I like someone to sort of be around and just kind of talk for me, just kind of casually, nothing too intense, just sort of, I need that to focus on rather than everything else that's going on. I need something to hone in on. Mum is a master of calming me down. Friends all get the talk of what to do, and it's finding somewhere that's not got loads of sensory input, somewhere quiet and things. And obviously, if I'm at home, nice blankets, a teddy, glowy lights, just kind of, and just bring myself out of it. But it's very much a crying, closing on myself experience. I also was asked the question, someone who wished to hug their daughter, but their daughter obviously found hugging a difficult experience sensory wise, and I know many autistic people who do. I personally don't. I'm actually quite a huggy person. I like the pressure and the feeling of being hugged by people I like. And my response to that was, because obviously she is a mother wanted to hug her child, and the truth is it's communication is what a hug is. A hug is passing on a message of love, but I said it wasn't for your daughter, it's not passing on a message of love. It's a probably quite a physically painful experience, because I know myself, negative sensory stimuli becomes very painful. It's not just I don't like the sensation, it's like this is painful, mission abort, mission abort, mission abort. And so I think to anyone who wonders the same, it's about finding ways to show that same message in other ways. So something we do in my family is, when I was very depressed, I didn't like being asked how I was, because it's a really stupid question, I think, when you're depressed, because you're not okay. You're really not okay. And so what we just started doing is kind of just twitching our noses at each other. Me and my mum, it was kind of this little twitch. You all right? Everything good? And a twitch back. It's all good. It's all fine. And we still do it now. And I notice we do it in public as well. We'll just kind of like be sitting somewhere and I'll just like twitch at her, make sure she's all right. It goes both ways. And I live with my mum and my grandma. My grandma started doing it. And that for us is a way of checking in on each other, because I mean, people lie when you ask them how they are as well. So it's about finding communication of whatever message it is, whether it's love, whether it's if you're okay, that works for you. One of the questions that's also really frequently come up, especially if you're in the UK, if you are looking to be diagnosed, GP is the first protocol. And I'd say look into your local area if there's any services or charities that you can turn to for help. They should have an email or online Facebook groups as well. There's a few. If you take social media with its flaws that it has, and the flaws of just people and responding and conflicting opinions, they're also a good source of information. On this screen are my contact details. I'm happy to be followed and tweeted at on Twitter. Most of what I talk about is autism research and occasionally other things. Mostly about autistic related things. And my email for any questions is on the screen, and I check that a couple of times a week. So I will get back to you at some point if you do send a question. So thank you for clicking on this YouTube video.